A very good evening to all of you. My name is Avinash Prana and I am the moderator for today's webinar. And it gives me an intense pleasure to welcome you all to an HRM webinar on the theme Between the Line, Young Turks. This webinar is divided into two parts. Learning session for 45 minutes and Q&A session for next 15 minutes. We would like to hear from you and would like to include your questions in the conversation. So ask questions, use the chat panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player to share at any time during the webinar. It's my privilege to have with us Mr. Neeraj sir. A very good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
And now may I request Mr. Neeraj sir to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Evening to all the attendees, the panelists, and my colleagues from NHRDN, and a special thanks to Advait and Eklavya. Welcome to this Between the Lines by which is always been hosted by Advait and Eklavya. Thank you so much. We're very proud that today we have a different looking Advait. That's a different aspect, but very proud to have four, or at this point 3 young Turks, as Advait has put in the heading there. But I would say that we hope to get a lot of insights from you, and I'm sure the large audience. I'm not going to tell you the numbers now, so because I don't want you to feel you're speaking to such a large audience. It's better if it's that way. I think there's a lot that we will all get from the 4 of you. So thank you so much, Prateek, Rama, Perizad, and Sonu, and over to you, Advait and Eklavya.
Okay, thank you, Neeraj, and welcome to this Apohan's Between the Lines session. Quick introduction: myself and Eklavya are part of a management consulting company based in Pune called Apohan. And last nearly 3 years, we've been organizing a program called Between the Lines. It's a monthly event that we organize typically in Pune. And every month we pick up a management book, which we believe is a good book to read or has got good reviews. And we present a summary of that book as a context setting for the panel discussion that follows after the book summary. So this time the book is a book called The Inheritors by Sonu Vaseem. And this is our 38th program, which means this is the 38th program that we are doing this. 38 books have been covered. We are fortunate to have the author, Ms. Sonu Vaseem, as part of our panel today, and she'll be joining soon. Every panel, after every summary, depending on what the book insights are, we invite people from the industry, and we have an illustrious panel today of what I call young Turks or next-gen business leaders. Perizad Zorabian is there, Prateek Sordia is there, and of course Rama Kirloskar. 3 of them are going to talk about their own journeys, their family businesses, and we're going to have a chat with Sonu, who's the author of the book, The Inheritors. So the format for the program is, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Eklavya. He's going to take us through a summary of the book written by Sonu, The Inheritors, and then I'll come back again, formally introduce our panelists of them today, and start the discussion for an hour or so. So about 25 to 30 minutes by Eklavya, and then our maybe for the panel discussion. That's going to be the format. We are happy to have large number of people who had registered and who have joined. And the last 2 months, given the situation, we have gone online. Of course, totally online. Otherwise, this program used to be only for Pune face-to-face. And therefore, we have people who have registered from 14 different countries, right from US to Hong Kong. So, welcome all the panelists, and over to you, Eklavya.
Thank you, Advait. I hope my screen is visible to everybody.
It is.
Okay. So Yeah. Advait, is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. Before we begin, just a disclaimer, this actually feels like a setup. It's almost like I'm being audited over here, because one thing that Advait didn't mention in his opening remarks, this is only the second time in the last 2.5, 3 years since we've been doing this program that we've actually had the author of the book joining us for the session. I think Advait likes to make sure periodically that I'm reading the entire book cover to cover, and this is his way of keeping a tab on me. But what an absolute privilege it is to have Sonu Bhasin with us today, because she has truly written a book that should be mandatory reading for anyone who's interested in learning more about corporate India history in general or family businesses in particular. It's not very often that I'll say this about a business book, but this one is a real page turner. The Inheritors is a behind the scenes look at 9 business families that own and control some of the most prominent Indian business houses. You can see the logos of these businesses or these companies coming up on the screen right now. And the stories of each business owner focuses on the culture, the family politics in some cases, the business rivalries definitely, and at times also the ego battles within each family. The Inheritors is a celebration of the entrepreneurial spirit of family-owned companies in India that form the backbone of our industry and economy. And honestly, reading these stories probably leaves an indelible impact that no MBA can ever make. While it is commonly believed that most family businesses will fall prey to the third generation curse of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, as the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie put it, these stories are, however, of families that have lived to tell the tale. And unfortunately, we would not have enough time to dwell into each of the stories that are present in the book. But what we've done is we've chosen a few of the stories which basically drive home certain themes that come out very strongly in the book. So let's start with that. Okay, the first one, Amit Barman, vice chairman of the 135-year-old Dabur Group, grew up listening to business discussions at the dining table. Living in a mansion with 4 other Burman families spread across 3 generations, it must have been near impossible to remain a mute spectator. Amit was also deeply influenced by his stint in Colgate-Palmolive in New York during his early years to gain a perspective of work outside of the family business. When he was summoned back to join Dabur, he felt stifled by the slow-paced growth and decided to set up an autonomous company, Dabur Foods, to launch fresh fruit juices. He faced harsh realities early on when the Indian consumers rejected his product outright because they were so used to preservatives, added color, and tons of sugar. I mean, it's no surprise that we became the diabetes capital of the world. It did not happen overnight. Real juice with its European packaging, with the cap on top, Brazilian sourced fruit juice concentrate, and no added sugar was a total misfit. These were not USPs for the consumers, at least. Amit could not even use the well-oiled Dabur distribution machinery because that was actually built for products that have a 2-year shelf life, unlike real juices, which had a shelf life of 6 months. And over and above that, packaging and transportation also played spoil sport. And frankly, whatever could go wrong did go wrong in the early years. Over and above, there was immense pressure from the family and the board members because they were simply not accustomed to seeing any new business division or product for that matter in the Dabur portfolio incur massive losses to that extent. He started the painstaking journey of building a team, putting a distribution chain in place, tweaking the product to suit the customer palette, and developing a marketing strategy that encouraged promotions and sampling. The efforts started paying off slowly, although he couldn't expand as much as he wanted on account of his family's frustratingly cautious approach to growth. Finally, when his biggest competitor, Onjuice, literally ran out of juice and filed for bankruptcy, there was no looking back, and Real is now the real jewel in the crown of Dabur. It is ironic that this standalone subsidiary, which was once on the verge of shutting down, was merged back into the parent company since it was making such a huge amount of profits. And in the process of this reverse merger, Amit Burman found that he was no longer with a job and he was not the CEO of Dabur Foods anymore. Now, some people might think that this is a pretty good time for him to sit back and take a well-deserved break. But this is the time when he moved into his other passion of setting up a food-related business. It helped that he was already one of the first Subway franchisees in India and learned the ropes of what it takes to succeed in the hyper-competitive and low-margin business of eating out. He launched Light Bite Foods with multiple brands like Sambar, Fresco, Baker Street, focusing on the mid-market segment and the four main cuisines, which according to him cover 85% of the dining out market, namely North Indian, South Indian, Chinese, and Italian. He was one of the first organized players, in fact, who started occupying the mall food courts, and he also saw potential in the travel segment, which he capitalized on. And all of this has resulted in Light Bite enjoying rentals as low as 8% of their OPEX, which is unprecedented in the industry because the average is somewhere around 20%. And within a relatively short span of time, he has managed to perfect the formula for balancing scale and profitability. I don't think you can go to any airport in the country right now and not encounter some brand of Light Bite Foods over there. That is assuming, of course, that you can enter an airport. And if you're wondering how he manages to juggle Light Bite Foods along with his role as the vice chairman at Dabur, well, he doesn't really have to, because it is now part of corporate folklore how Dabur ownership and management are separate and distinct from each other. Like his elder brother says, they paid 10 crore rupees to McKinsey to tell them that all of them must quit the company. If you have any doubts over whether this really works, there's a fantastic anecdote in the book about the launch of a new mint flavored Hajmola candy. At a review meeting prior to the launch, a young manager offered the soon to be launched candy to the chairman, Anand Burman. He put it in his mouth and spat it out in disgust. He made no bones about the fact that he hated it, and everybody was petrified about what will happen to the impending launch now. The CEO, Sunil Duggal, calmly replied that we've carried out market research that has come out positive, and we will be proceeding with the launch next month. And in case you're interested, the Mint Hajmola set a record of 8 crore rupees worth of sales in the first year itself post-launch. And before I move ahead to the next story in our series, I must share a rather sensitive point that Sonu brings to light: the unwritten rule that women will not have any shareholding in the Dabur business. And Amit Burman's justification to that is that women get married and they might fall upon a time of need in their new family, and in that scenario they might pledge the shares of Dabur, and that was clearly a risk that they did not want to take. So this is something which I'm sure we would like to touch upon during the panel discussion as well, because this is pretty much a bone of contention across most family businesses. And quite clearly, the Priyambada Birla episode must have vindicated their stance to some extent. Okay, moving on to the next one. Agastya Dalmia. He's the scion of the famous Dalmia family, which was once among the richest families in India. In an inspiring rags to riches story, his grandfather owned Dalmia Jain Airways, Punjab National Bank, Bharat Insurance, which later became LIC, and the most prized, Bennett Coleman and Company. I think it's fair to say that if you own Times of India, you were probably the second most powerful family in the country. However, one of their marquee businesses was probably the smallest in terms of revenue: the 100-year-old brand Kevinters, which has been revived by Agastya recently. Those of us who hail from Delhi would fondly remember that no trip to Connaught Place would be ever complete without Kevinters Kasata ice cream or milkshakes in those iconic glass bottles. Without any formal management education, Agastya decided to relaunch Kevinters after his friend suggested him to do so. And This turned out to be something of not really a challenge, but yeah, it turned out to be a massive blunder in the beginning because he could not have foreseen the kind of obstacles that would come their way. And there were multiple failures also. First and foremost, neither of them had any experience in the dairy business or the food business. So first of all, they had to get somebody on board with experience in that area. And in the absence of original formulations which were lost decades ago, they struggled to get the flavors right. They also made the mistake of selling food as well instead of focusing solely on the one thing that patrons associated the brand with, which was milkshakes. Customers were also quite disappointed and disgruntled when they started serving milkshakes in cups or glasses instead of the good old glass bottles. Even the contemporary brand logo, trendy look of the store, and colorful staff uniforms were too jarring for customers to accept. Finally, they went back to the drawing board and realized that they needed to pay tribute to the colonial heritage and vintage appeal of the brand. They shut down business for almost a year and came back in a totally new, or should I say old avatar, having ticked all the boxes this time around. While the business is on a steady growth path right now, only time will tell whether he's able to emulate his illustrious grandfather. Harsh Mariwala, a very familiar face, very familiar name for all of us. But did you know one thing? This is something that I learned from the book. It was absolutely new to me. Harsh Mariwala's surname is actually Vasanji. The name Mariwala came about because his grandfather, who started the spices and agri commodities trade business, used to trade in black pepper, which was called Mari in Gujarati. And that's how Mariwala came about. Now, Harsh Mariwala is rightly credited with building one of the largest FMCG companies in India, Marico. And there is only so much I can tell you which has not been immortalized in business literature already. Whether it is his innovations in packaging, experimenting with flat org structures, brand building, or right now, fostering entrepreneurship as well. I do, however, wanted to tell you a couple of compelling things that I learned from the book. So Mariwala was denied an MBA education by his father, who felt he would be better off joining the family business. Undeterred and eager to learn, when he had to build the brand Marico later on, he enrolled the services of a marketing consultant cum professor who was teaching at IIM Ahmedabad. But the professor was busy with his college duties during the day, so he said that I can only teach you during the night. And Harsh used to take a late evening flight to Ahmedabad, study brand building throughout the night with the professor, and then take an early morning flight back to Bombay. I mean, that's his passion for gaining an education. The other incident is about the famous brand war between Hindustan Lever in those days and Marico. So HLL wanted to buy out Parachute coconut oil because they were coming out with their own brand Nehar, and Parachute was the only brand in the country at that time. So they realized the best way to grow was to acquire Parachute. Keki Dadi Seth, then HLL chairman, called up Harsh Mariwala one evening and said, Mr. Mariwala, I will pay you enough money to take care of you and all your future generations so you'll never have to work again. But Mariwala did not reply anything, and Keki Dadi Seth then threatened him explicitly that if he did not sell, then HLL would make sure that there would be nothing left of Parachute in the market. That's the time when Mariwala famously replied over the call, Mr. Dadi Seth, you might think that I'm nuts for rejecting your offer, but you will find that I'm a tough nut to crack. Thanks, but no thanks. This story does have a happy ending. A few years later, Mariwala actually vanquished HLL by buying out its coconut oil business instead. So yeah, life did come around full circle for him. The last story that we can focus on right now on account of the time available is also one of the most interesting ones perhaps. So these two gentlemen, I don't know how many of you are able to identify them, Kuldeep Singh and Gurbachan Singh Dhingra. They are the fourth generation of the Dhingra family, better known as the owners of India's second largest paints company, Berger Paints. The family started in the paints business back in 1898 when their great-grandfather opened a paint shop in Amritsar. They expanded their presence rapidly across what was undivided India at the time, and they even had interest in London back then. And this was all done on the back of something which was absolutely path-breaking and pioneering for that time, a profit-sharing business model. So way back in the early 1900s, they used to hire professional managers to run the business for them. And these managers were like quasi CEOs, and they were termed as working partners, and they were actually given a share in the net profit. So net of all costs. The family members, on the other hand, were the owner partners who would invest all the money which was required for the purchase of shops, warehouses, inventory, working capital, and they would charge interest for the funds that have been loaned out to the business. Life was going great for them until Kuldeep and Gurbachan's father passed away at a very young age in a very tragic, I wouldn't say accident, but in a tragic incident of sorts. And that's when the family, at least their part of the family, they lost everything that they had. They lost all their businesses. Their father was in the process of setting up his dream of a manufacturing plant. They could not do that. And the only thing that was left to their name was the original Amritsar shop, which had come to them in inheritance over the last couple of generations. This is when the Dhingra family culture and values came to their aid, and they got back on their feet somewhat. The family bailed them out. They helped them out to the extent possible. All of his uncles, aunts, all of them rallied around the family. And they decided that come what may, they will not sell out their Amritsar shop because there was so much of emotional attachment to that. But how does a young widow with 3 sons, one of whom is in IIT, the other 2 are still in school, how does she manage a business raising her young family in Delhi while the shop is located in Amritsar? So once again, they fell back on their old trusted culture and values. They appointed 2 working partners for the shop, and the lady took both of them to the Golden Temple in Amritsar and made them swear, take an oath over there in front of the Guru Granth Sahib, that they will remain loyal to the family forever and they will not cheat them. And then she came back. And that was the kind of trust that they enjoyed for many, many years later. And things were going fine. It was slowly reviving. Business was coming back, not to usual, but back in some semblance of sorts. And the children slowly started rebuilding the business. And this time they got into manufacturing as well. And they came up with the brand Rajdoot Paints, which started gaining a lot of traction in North India thanks to Kuldeep Singh Dhingra's exemplary sales efforts and some very innovative things in terms of dealer deposits, which was an unheard of concept back in those days. So he came up with some really out of the box schemes to ensure that they had enough working capital to keep the factory running, because the factory was guzzling away money like nobody's business. And at the same time, they started gaining reputation of being extremely honest, very ethical businessmen who could be always trusted and relied upon, as they always stuck to their commitments. Finally, the watershed moment for them came around the time of 1980 Moscow Olympics. They bagged a huge order from the Soviet Union, and once that tap was opened, it never stopped thereafter. It came to such an extent that they were probably among the top 3 exporters to the Soviet Union from India. And they started selling everything to the Soviets, right from paints, of course, to shampoos, detergent, toothpaste, shaving creams, you name it, and they were pretty much selling it. This was the kind of trust that they enjoyed behind the Iron Curtain. And that, speaks again about the kind of ethics and honesty with which they were dealing their business. In fact, there's a very interesting story that when the Godrej Group wanted to start some exports to Soviet Union, again, this is back in the license Raj, so you had to go through these accredited companies only, which were very few, like the Dhingras. Adi Godrej personally called up Kuldeep and requested his assistance. And then finally, for them also, life came back full circle when they acquired Berger Paints from Vijay Mallya in the early 90s. And there was a lot of question and doubt surrounding this acquisition. The industry was not sure whether it made any commercial sense, whether they'll be able to turn around it. But they managed to do that. They managed to script a historic turnaround for the failing business. And among all the other things that they did to revive this business, to bring it back on its feet, and to bring it to the position that now it is the second largest paints company in India, one of the things that they did, which again strikes a chord, is that they went back to their age-old trusted practice of profit sharing, and they came up with ESOPs, which was the first time that it was actually done in their industry. And again, mind you, this is back in the early 90s, mid 90s. It was unheard of, the practice of ESOPs. And it took them also quite a bit of convincing to do, because, Kuldeep Singh Dhingra, apparently, he told the CEO of Berger Paints for 3 years consecutively, he would keep telling him that, why don't you introduce ESOPs if you feel that employees are not willing to work, or the motivation or morale is at very abject levels? Why don't you tell them about ESOPs? We are willing to make them partners in the business, and let's see if that helps restore things to normalcy. After 3 years of questioning him and not getting any reply, Kuldeep Dhingra once brought this up during a board meeting, and he was stunned that nobody else, none of the other functional heads, had even heard of this proposition from the management side, from the owner side, simply because the CEO had kept this hidden from all the other people, because he felt, again, in true perhaps Calcutta tradition, this is a Calcutta headquartered company, he felt that it would be beneath his dignity to be at the same level, or to occupy the same perch or pedestal as all other employees. So he felt that how can you even make them partners in profit? Finally, everybody else obviously welcomed it, and that's when the turnaround of Berger Paints really started to take place. And in case you're interested in learning more about this little known business family, but of course, which is one of the richest business families in India, you might want to pick up Sonu's first book, which is Unstoppable, and it's a fantastic read. I would urge you all, not just this book, but you should pick up the other one also, because it's high time that all of us learned a little bit more about corporate India business history also. This finally brings us to what are some of the key takeaways that we feel we've learned from a family business perspective, what we could advise family businesses in time to come, that if they really want to build to scale and, more importantly, build to last, you just need to keep some things in mind. First and foremost, contrary to popular opinion and expectations, it's not really a cakewalk for the inheritors as well. It is tough, as some of these stories illustrate. It's not always rags to riches. It is cyclical in nature. And whether you like it or not, things happen which are out of your control. But it's all about how you're able to quickly bounce back and remember that you're part of a business family which is known, for bringing about certain pride to the country. The sooner you can get back on your feet. So it's not as easy as it seems from the outside. I know a lot of us begrudge all, like industry science, and we think that everything comes easy to them, but that's not necessarily the case. And the book really illustrates and drives that point home beautifully. The second point, of course, is that the old has to yield to the new. And this is something which doesn't come easily to anybody, in fact, because nobody really wants to relinquish that position of authority, that position of power. But the newer generation has to be allowed to carve out its own path, even if it means stepping out of the family business umbrella for some time, just in order to identify what is it that they resonate with and what is it that they can really add value to. And the last thing, which I think is one of the common threads across the entire book, value the family values. You cannot have really a compromising attitude towards this aspect, at least. It needs to be unyielding. It needs to have an unrelenting focus, because come what may, these family values are what brought you up to here, and which will probably take you till wherever it is that you're trying to reach. So that's the summary of the book from my side. And like I said earlier, it's a pretty interesting, it's a very compelling read. And I don't think you will miss out on anything if you pick up the book, give it some time, read it. You get to learn so much more. You get to learn so many, trivia about corporate India, which were probably not known to you earlier. And also you gain a deeper appreciation for these iconic families, which have really shaped the Indian business and economy to date. That's it from my side. Thank you all so much. And we now move on to the panel discussion.
Thanks, Eklavya, for that fantastic summary of the book. Like you mentioned, while Sonu has written an entire book on just one of the stories, I think we could also do entire webinars on each of these stories. And there are 9, and we just covered about 3 or 4. But thanks for the wonderful presentation. and that takes me to the formal part of the panel discussion. I'll start with the formal introduction of our panelists, starting with, like you mentioned, it's only the second time we've been fortunate to have the author of the book as part of the panel. So welcome Sonu. Sonu Bhasin, as all you know now, has written this book, which is what we summarize, The Inheritors. As you can see, she has an illustrious corporate career of over 30 years. She was a TAS officer, and as all of us know, TAS is a very well-respected and sought-after kind of corporate career. She's worked in the Tata Group quite obviously, then moved on to work with other blue chip companies like ING, Axis, Yes Bank, and joining back Tata Capital as CEO. She's on the board as an independent director of one of the companies there, which is Berger Paints, the last company that we talked about, and Whirlpool. She now runs a family and business kind of magazine, and she's a consultant on family business. She's obviously a family business historian, having written books on the trials and tribulations of what I call working in a family and the different generations. So welcome Sonu, and it's great to have you on the panel. Joining her is Perizad Surabian. All of us, I'm sure, knew Perizad as an actor, as a model, as a star, but she's here today not just because of that, but because she's managing a very successful brand called Surabian Chicken, and she works. This company was started by her dad, Khurram Surabian, about more than 30 years ago, and now she's fully operational last nearly 7-8 years now. Going back to where she started, she's a gold medalist from Mumbai University, Xavier's College. Went to the US first to study, the acting and ballet, and of course, she's done an MBA as well. She is a prolific speaker. She's been invited to speak at various conferences and seminars and workshops in the good old days, which was 2 months ago, and now she's joining us online. Welcome, Perizad. I think of all the panelists and the speakers here today, perhaps you're the only person who's not working from home, and I can see you in your office.
Yes. Thank you, Advait. Thank you.
Welcome, Perizad, formally. Our next panelist is Rama, and if you can now switch on your camera, Rama, so that people can see you. Rama comes from the illustrious Kirloskar family. She is the 5th generation Kirloskar, and we'll talk about that graph that Ikilve showed us about 3rd generation. We'll talk about that to her as well. Currently, she is the managing director of one of the Kirloskar group companies called Kirloskar Ebara Pumps. This is a JV between Kirloskar and Ebara Corporation of Japan. Prior to joining her flagship company, Kirloskar Brothers Limited, as general manager and head of product development, she's worked in the US with venture partners, Polaris Venture Partners in the venture capital industry, and in the research institute of Koch Institute of MIT before coming back here. And as I had introduced her on social media, she is sort of balancing her very busy corporate life. And she was telling me the other day that lockdown has made her work more and long hours and smarter hours than what she was here, 9 to 9 kind of thing. And she still manages to balance that life by flying, by bird watching, and her work in the wildlife conservation. So she used to be a basketball player at the national level in her student days. So welcome, Rama, and it's good to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Advait. Apologies, my webcam is not turning on.
Okay. And last but not the least, after the 3 ladies, we have Pratik Chordia, the young scion of the Chordia Group and the director at Panchsheel Hotels and the Panchsheel Group. People in Pune especially would need a formal introduction with Pratik and the Chordia family. Panchsheel Group is very, very active and foremost in real estate, hospitality, retail. They own and operate large number of international hotel brands like DoubleTree, Marriott, JW, and now, of course, the latest addition is the Ritz-Carlton. And to be ready for this sort of work in his family business, Pratik went to Switzerland and got formally educated from the hotel management perspective. And since then, he's managed all the properties of the hospitality properties of the group. Currently, he is also overseeing the group's diversification into industrial parks, which is another feather in the group's cap. So, welcome, Prateek. And I know I'm now, what should I say, third or fourth time lucky to have you here, finally, and including the 2 calls that we had today morning. So, finally, nice to see you here. Okay. So, with this, let me start, since we have the book and we, of course, have Sonu with us. I'll start with Sonu. Most obvious question.
So before you do that, Advait, let me just first thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you. And also Eklavya for brilliantly putting through the stories that some of them I forgot myself, because this book is about 3 years old. So I've forgotten some of them. It's such a pleasure to hear them from somebody.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sonu. It was real fun.
It's nice to see that you like the presentation, especially when you must have done maybe 20 times more research to write these pages than what you can see. But coming back to you, I think after reading the book and after hearing Eklavya's presentation, the first question that comes in my mind is how did you get to do this book? What prompted you? What was the genesis of this book? And more importantly, why did you choose these 9 families?
Okay, so let me just go back to what you said as part of my introduction, which was that I'd spent about 28, 29 years in the corporate world before I decided to do my own thing in family businesses. One of the reasons that I chose to work in the area of family businesses is because I do believe, after having seen a lot of them as a banker, even when I was part of the target group, that I do believe that they are the unsung heroes of the Indian economy and whichever other economy they are present in. Because we know that they exist around us, but we never give them the due that is really due to them for their contribution to the whichever economies that they're present in. So some of the statistics, and here I may be, preaching to the choir, but these statistics are amazing, that 90% of world commerce is in the hands of family-owned businesses. They are the largest contributors to the GDP, anything from 60% to 90%, depending on which country they're in. They are the largest employers outside of the government. They consistently deliver better profits in the long term when compared to non-family businesses. They are also known not to lay off employees during a crisis when non-family businesses, but somehow we've never given them the due. That was point 1. Point 2 was that whenever we talk of family businesses, and some of the names that you took, Eklavya took, when you talk of a person like, say, Amit Barman, or even Harsh Mariwala, even when he was a youngster, or look at the 2 people who are on screen here, Perizad, Rama, the first thought that comes to people's mind when they look at such people is, oh, their life is so simple. What's their problem? I mean, they come from well-to-do families. They've got their businesses well set up. It's been handed over to them. What unki life mein kya challenge hai? What is the problem? But when I've worked with family businesses and the business owners, I tell you, each one of them has had challenges. Each one of them has stared at failure right in the face, some of which Eklavya alluded to. But the world just sees their so-called glamorous life. They see their outward trappings of success, but they really don't know what goes behind these years and years and years of hard work, the grit, the determination that makes them the success that they are. So when Penguin asked me to write a book on family businesses, I was clear that I did want to tell stories. I didn't want to write an academic book. I did want to tell stories because I do believe that storytelling is the best way to get a message across to people. And then it was a question of sitting down with my editor and choosing people who the world knows, but the businesses that the world knows, but the people behind the businesses are not well known. And I must say that I'm extremely fortunate that we had a short list of 10 people. I contacted all 10 of them. All 10 said yes. There are 9 stories in The Inheritors. The 10th one we couldn't take because of a legal veto from Penguin. They were sure that we would be able to carry that story.
The story. When I said 9 and you said you actually wanted 10. So.
We wanted 10. I mean, there was a nice round number of 10 stories in the book, but it just got whittled down to 9. And I did want to tell the stories of what goes on behind the scenes that make the people the success that they are today.
Sure. So we'll come back to you for getting some more inside the track on what went into the book. Prateek, maybe I'll start with you if you don't mind. You are one of the last to get introduced, but I'll start the questions with you. And one of the things, one of the last slides on Eklavya's presentation and something which Sonu did mention was, it's nice for all of us to say that, hey, you guys come from illustrious families, so it must be an easy thing for you to start. Some of us know that it was not exactly an easy thing for you to start. So how was it? And, was it always given and understood in your family that you will join the family business? Were you allowed, if I can use the word, allowed to think that you want to do something differently, or it was a written or unwritten thing that, ye to aayega hi business?
Okay, so firstly, I think in my introduction, you mentioned that I run all the group's hotels. That's not the case. I run hotel for the group and other activities at the same time.
Sure.
So we are primarily into commercial office spaces, and we build large-scale office parks for various multinationals based out of Pune. So having said that, when I joined, I wanted to start a business which was into warehousing and industrial parks. So if I was allowed to start, yes, I am, but within the I'm given a large enough platform to start it off. Having said that, it comes with its own challenges of internal office politics, whether it comes to allocation of resources, etc., etc. So there is a fight always happening in those terms.
Sure.
And it's fun to a certain extent, annoying on most days, but it's been a fun journey so far. So I've been successful in getting one industrial park up and running. Construction will begin soon. So, on the way to doing a few more.
Okay, great, lovely. Let me come to Perizad. We all know that you were and are a successful star and model and actor. What made you sort of more or less quit that career, leave that success behind, and join your father and your brothers into this family business?
So for everyone who's listening, Advait is my guru, and he has been coaching me and the company actually over the last 3 years. So it feels a bit strange to have Advait ask me this question with such a poker face, because he knows me inside out. He knows which buttons of mine kind of to push. So I'm going to kind of try and answer that like he doesn't have the answers. But Advait, ever since I was a little girl, the dream was always to be an entrepreneur. When I could barely pronounce the word, and I adore, love, worship my father. So there was no other business I would do but kind of Zorabian. And I've been fortunate to have seen my father grow Zorabian from when I was a little girl. It's a 38-year-old company, and we used to go to the farm. And I've always known my father to not just be the most respected, but also to be a great innovator in terms of where poultry is concerned. We used to have choppers kind of flying down, and any foreign delegation would come to Zorabian to kind of see our processes. So even though we were small in size, we were really right up there in terms of our processes and how we function. So going, the dream was always to kind of carry on that legacy. Acting kind of was not part of the plan, and it just happened. I'm really fortunate to be part of a family where both my parents have been hugely supportive of anything I chose to do, and they continue to be supportive of anything I, want to do.
Sure.
So I think the acting just kind of was something I enjoyed doing. And my father was really sweet. He said, you know what, you have one life to live. Do what makes you happy. I'm like your security net, but give it your best, right? And when you want to come back to Zorabian's always there waiting for you. So once I got married and I was pregnant, like it was almost organic. I went right back to working at Zorabian. And it's been amazing. It's been amazing ever since.
Okay. We lost your voice, I think, but okay.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah. One just comment is that I know your parents have been supportive of you in terms of whatever you want to do, they will support you. I'm not sure whether if you say that you're going back to acting, I'm not sure what kind of support you'll get. But just joking.
My father
Okay.
will not allow me. I'm sure he'll be like, we need you
Yeah.
at work.
Sure. Rama, I know we can't see you. There seems to be some problem at your end, but hopefully you can hear what's happening and you can hear us.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay. So coming to you, let me go back to the same question. You are of course the 5th generation now, unlike Prateek or Irzad who are 2nd generation. So were you always sort of born and brought up to join the business, if I can use that term? Or did you get and you were in the US and you did work there, and was there any option to not join back, or was it your call? Was it somebody else's call? How does it work?
So Advait, I can't claim to be one of those people who always dreamt right from my childhood to want to make pumps, because it's not a very glamorous business. And
Yeah.
I think my parents have always been very open to whatever it is that I have liked in my life, because I think all of us would agree, and which I have learned, is specifically in family-driven businesses. If you have the next generation who's truly passionate and devoted and committed to the business, it could be the best thing that could happen to a family business. But on the converse, if you have somebody who has been straitjacketed and forced into a role that they never liked,
Sure.
and there's complacency and decadence, then it could be the worst thing to happen for that family business. And therefore, my parents have always told me to follow my heart and follow my passion, because that is where success truly comes from. So, I was always interested in the biological sciences, and I ended up getting a double degree in biology and mathematics from Bryn Mawr College. And I proceeded into going into a research group at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where we were able to publish a paper on a potential dengue vaccine, which eventually got commercialized. And after my time at MIT, I was able to work at a medtech company and also a PE firm in Boston. So it gave me a 360-degree view of how businesses are run, how commercialization takes place. And that's when I told my father that, since this vaccine has now gone into commercialization, it's probably going to take a decade or two, because that's how the pharma industry works. There are very long lead times to market. And with the FDA approvals and the clinical trials, it's going to really be
Today's time it is 7 months, but yeah,
a long time for that vaccine to see the light of day. So that's when I told my father that I would like. So that's when I told my father that I would like to join the family business, because I believe I would have a better return on investment. And that's when I started my career at KBL. And one aspect that truly struck me is in our family, the value system has always been to create a positive impact on society. And if you've noticed it, if you look at the history of our family, all the products have arisen to cater to a certain need, to address a certain hardship. So you don't really think of Kirloskar in your day-to-day lives, unless of course your pump is not working or your air conditioner is not working. So
Sure.
our presence is actually felt by our absence.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Lovely.
So
one more.
so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how.
Go
So
ahead.
that's my story. Come back.
Yeah. And how easy or
I
difficult is it to sort of marry biology and mechanical engineering and fluid mechanics together?
yeah. So I felt that looking at
Hello.
in today's day and age, fields are converging at such a fast pace, every disciplinary approach, and business models are changing. Business life cycles are changing. So I think it's important that you have that sort of uh, lateral growth, right? Because it's good to have people from different industries because it brings out of the box thinking. It brings new thoughts into the culture and the business.
So it helped that you were not part of the standard engineering crowd and you started getting into the engineering business. Rama, can you hear me?
Yes, definitely. Because I think the pharma business is extremely competitive. It's extremely cutthroat, and I find the mechanical engineering business more static.
Mhm.
It's not as dynamic and slower paced, in fact.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so it's much more stability, and A plus B is C. There's formula and there are equations, unlike biology. Okay. Coming back to you, Perizad, in today's times, it's going to be an easy answer, but I want you sort of to go back to history and not just last 2 months. And what has been your most critical moment when you started working with your father in the family business?
So what has been my most difficult moment? So with poultry, one does see a lot of highs and a lot of terrible, terrible lows. And as a little girl, I think I've only seen the highs. But when I joined Zorabian, it's 10 years ago actually. The company was seeing a terrible low. We were in really bad shape because of a bird flu, and it just kind of wiped us clean. And I've never seen my father so stressed and so you know just in such a bind. Even then, he was someone who wanted to kind of we realized at that point that because of our scale and our size, we could no longer compete with the larger firms, with the institutional and the wholesale business. We got hit by the bird flu. We were just, I mean, nothing kind of was making any sense. And at that point, he took a call to transition into the retail space and directly get to the consumer who understood and valued quality, where we could get a better price for our product, because compromising on product quality was really never something that Zorabian as a company has ever catered to, no matter what your business or our target is, whether it's institutions or I stepped in when we were almost bankrupt, and my father wanted to start this retail business. So I kind of stepped in to fix some packaging, and then of course for our retail packs, and then of course realized that there was no team that was going to make that possible. We had a company full of people with a very wholesale mindset, and dealing with a retail customer really has a lot of different sensitivities. And my second child was 1 year old, and we launched Zorabian's ready to cook range. And I started working with him to kind of just hold fort in some way or try to contribute in whatever way I could. I didn't know anything about retail. Yes, I have an MBA and I may have been a, Bombay University gold medalist, but I had no real experience. Besides the, just the determination to kind of be like a Jhansi Ki Rani and kind of, stand still and kind of support the team. And we built a whole retail team and have grown one step at a time, one day at a time. Faced huge challenges because of paucity of funds, but just on the sheer strength of product goodwill and word of mouth, we've grown from one level to the next level, and today we're definitely Mumbai's preferred brand of chicken. So it's been an incredible journey. It's been an incredible journey, full of challenges, each one, because you've mentored us over 3 years, and it's been tough. But we've when you have a product that's of great quality, I think, and then you have the right attitude and the right commitment and the ability to persevere no matter what. I think if you've got all those things right, success does eventually follow.
Sure. So you mentioned, you were a 100% wholesale company and you started the retail brand. So from a 100-0 wholesale retail, where are you now? Where have you transformed that company? Where are you in terms of wholesale retail today?
So I would say we're like 50-50, and we're 50% wholesale still, because all the institutions at value quality definitely reach out to Zorabian, because we are premiumly priced in comparison to the rest. And the 50% is retail, but of course our turnover was also scaled that much, and all the numbers.
Yeah, of course. Rama did mention in her reply, about the 100-plus-year-old family that she comes from, and therefore the values, family values, and the organizational values it brings in. How important those values were in these difficult moments, whether it was the earlier crisis or today. How have you sort of worked with them?
So there was a Reliance, there was a Dr. Dash from Reliance actually, who found me very arrogant and stubborn when I wasn't negotiating margins with him. And he says, you have this arrogance because you have the legacy of your father's quality. And it kind of, I knew it gave him a lot of anger and a lot of wind, but Advait, my father's focus was always about, giving you unmatchable quality at an extremely competitive price. To date, right? We always, as a company, there is no compromise on quality. So whilst I head sales, marketing, operations, and distribution, my brother Shahzad handles all the contract farming and all the operations from a farming perspective. And he is, he's the Steve Jobs, right? He's someone who won't compromise for anything in the world. So even if I have an evil bent to kind of hit a number, try and kind of, make a little bit idhar udhar, Shahzad kind of makes sure that nothing, we don't lose track. With chicken, we're selling meat, feeding people. Quality is so imperative, and that's one value. No matter what, not for size, not for scale, not for business, have we ever compromised on. And I think that is, like, as Dr. Dash says, that's the legacy I take forward. And that's the legacy I hope my children take forward if they take on.
Sure. Okay, lovely. I'll come back to some part of it again, Parizad. Prateek, coming over to you again. You mentioned, that you overseeing the hospitality. DoubleTree, of course, is something that you directly oversee. Now, how easy or difficult has it been when, while you are a family owner manager, but in a hotel, in a 5-star hotel, you also have a general manager who's as good as a professional CEO. How do you manage this professional versus kind of, family owner versus manager kind of dichotomy that always exists in your day-to-day? And it could happen in the other businesses also, but specifically in the hospitality.
I manage by telling myself that I cannot do a better job. So
that's very candid. Yeah.
When I want to, especially running a hotel is so difficult in terms of time. You have to give it day in and day out. There are various issues that come up on a daily basis, I realized very early that I'm not put out to sit here and deal with all the issues all day long. So I'd rather have a general manager and me doing things that I want to do as well with my time. Hotel business is very, very difficult to manage in terms of growth and scale also. So I've always wanted to, look outside of it in order to keep this business running as well as, venture out on my own business career. So the answer is that I respect the professionals for what they have learned and respect their ideas in order to keep myself.
Yeah, but of course, respect professionals. Know that you can't do everything, but it's like they always say, it's easier said than done. How have you actually managed to do that? बोलने के लिए तो अच्छा है.
So I'm in the hotel today after a very long time, but
Okay.
I don't come so much. So it's just out of my mind.
Okay.
I can be a micromanager, so I'd rather not be here. As long as the profits are flowing in, it's not a problem.
Okay, interesting. I'll come back to you on that. Before I come to you, Sonu, just a request to all the attendees here that if you have any questions, please put those questions in the chat box, and we'll take some of the common questions that have come up so that you can get the answers from any of the panelists. So thank you. Sonu, coming back to you, one more thing that is often mentioned, and there was the slide in Eklavya's presentation as well, is this famous third generation curse that family businesses have. Now, being a family business historian, having researched so many family businesses, why has it happened? And of course, I'm going to come back to Rama and ask her what's the how have they managed to sort of beat that, and she's in the 5th generation now. But before that, what's your take on it? Why does it more often than not happens that way? And that graph was pretty scary, that the first generation sets up, second generation thrives, and third generation sort of squanders.
Yeah. So yeah, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And I think the world is full of examples of that. Because, if you look at the data, it's only 3% of all family businesses around the world that make it to the 4th generation or beyond. So you'll see far more number of people who haven't been able to break that jinx of the 3rd generation than you will see people who manage to to persevere. And Rama is part of that very elite group of people who make it to the 4th generation and beyond. Coming to the reasons why, unlike what most people intuitively believe, that businesses fail to perpetuate because they don't have good products or they don't have good practices, the work that I have done and also the research that has been done in this field shows that businesses fail to perpetuate because of what happens in the family or what doesn't happen in the family. And it is discord in the family of any kind that directly impacts the business negatively. So one is that typically what happens is that there is a founder, or say a founder plus a brother, or a founder plus 2 brothers who set up the shop, set up operations. The second generation are more than 3 in number. I mean, 3 people, if they stay together for a full generation, that's good enough. But when their own inheritors, and I do talk of inheritors largely as male inheritors, because again, that is a phenomenon that one has to, yeah. I mean, people like Perizad and Rama are again part of that elite, less than 6% or 7% world over, where women are running the core businesses. So coming back to why businesses fail to perpetuate, so there's as the number of people who are involved in businesses increase, the probability of any discord happening and a conflict happening rises. So that's one, which is normal human tendency. the other part is that the fire in the belly keeps on decreasing from one generation to the other. So when there is the founder who built it from scratch, always, I have yet to come across a patriarch who's built the business himself, telling me that he thinks that his son has the same amount of fire in the belly or the same amount of motivation to make the business better or to grow the business. And by the time you come, and if you're part of that 30% of family businesses that do make it to the second generation, consolidate it, grow it, or even just manage it, by the time you come to the third generation, that fire in the belly likely goes unless the messaging to the children, the inheritors, has been the right one, if I can use that word, right from the very beginning. So typically what happens is, sorry Advait, just finish, because this happens not only in business families but also in professional families. When a generation, so if I talk of myself, generation that has done considerably better than my previous generation, having financial hardships or not being able to take financial security for granted. Once I have a bit of money and financial security, I don't want my children to go through that same pain of financial insecurity. And therefore, I make them so comfortable that they don't really know anything except financial security. And to my mind, I don't blame the inheritors that much, because the messaging to them from the beginning has been, worry mat karo, don't worry, I'm there, don't worry. And when in my work with family, where the messaging from the beginning has been that, yes, this is all for you, but you have to be part of the business, or you have to stand on your own feet, or you have to make something on your own, those inheritors have done brilliantly well.
Okay, excellent. Okay. A question from one of the attendees, Ashok Kumar, for you, Sonu, is that, do you believe, is there any inherent advantage of family business versus professional businesses?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So see, 90% of world commerce is in hands of family businesses, so you can't run away from them. Two, family businesses typically have a more long-term approach. Again, there's enough research done on that. I've had the good fortune of working very closely with one of the Rothschilds family bank, Edmond de Rothschild group, and the Baron himself told me, I was a banker at that time, and we were working together, and the Baron said that for me, quarter on quarter doesn't matter. I don't care if my quarter doesn't work well, because my business, he said, I'm the 7th generation and I want my business to go for the next 7 generations. So their outlook is more long term. So strategies are more long term. For example, it is my intuitive belief, and I hope empirical data a year after, I do believe that it will be the family businesses that will emerge stronger and faster from this COVID situation, because their decision making is faster. They will think of the long term. And therefore they will take decisions that are more long term and with a business focus, rather than whether I will make my bonus at the end of the year or not.
Lovely, great insights, Sonu. Rama, question to you. I think there's a audience question, but I'll just pick up from where Sonu stopped. Is that family businesses take a long-term view? Now, what happens and how do you balance this long-term view when your flagship company is a publicly listed company and therefore quarterly results are also important? So how do you manage this family long-term view versus what your investors want on a quarter-to-quarter? Rama, you could hear that question?
Sorry, there's a time lag. Can you please repeat?
I'm just picking up on what Sonu mentioned, that family businesses have an inherent advantage because they take a long-term view. So my question to you is, how do you balance this long-term view, which typically families would have, versus when your flagship company is a publicly listed company, and therefore, quarterly results are also as important. How do you manage this kind of balance?
I don't believe you have to make a compromise between the two, because business continuity is good for the company, whether it's in the short term or the long term. I mean, there have been many instances where we have had to compromise in the short term in terms of business opportunity, simply because those type of opportunities did not match well with our value system. So we've had to actually let go of a lot of growth opportunities to stay in line with our value system. But in term, it has always helped the company in the long term business growth.
So you're saying you actually sort of let go some opportunities from because they were perhaps opportunities in the short run, but you kept the long term in mind.
Yes, of course.
One more question from Rujuta, one of the people who's attending, and I know her, therefore I know the background to which perhaps she's also asking this question. But people in family business, we talk of generation gap, but sometimes you have your siblings and you have cousins also in the business with you. How do you manage these kind of issues? Because everybody, especially the younger generation, you're in your fifth generation of the family. Obviously, unlike some of your, the older people, all of you are well educated abroad. You come back, getting back into family business, and therefore everybody has their own independent. How do you manage this kind of conflicts, if at all they arise? Are there any kind of rule books or guidelines or kind of things that happen?
This is for me or for Feriza?
No,
I think that's where value system.
Okay. So how do you correlate that directly into taking some decisions which are at cross purpose perhaps?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure who this question is for.
No, to you, Rama. How do you manage
so, I would say that's where, yes, that's where value system comes into the picture.
Okay.
Because, our family has always been brought up on this value system based on frugality. And I'll come back to the founder and the fact that, all our products were made to address a need or a hardship. So we've always had this very service-oriented approach. Wealth generation has been incidental. In fact, I've heard in our family people say, what does a man lack to find the need of so many things? And coming back to the business continuity point, right? Why is it that we've been able to last for this long? And I would believe it's because of the goodwill that the Kirloskar name has created. It's not that we've not been through bad times, but we've had a lot of people who've come forward and helped us during those bad times.
Yeah, I know that
of the goodwill that the business has created. And I think this kind of, and I believe this mindset carries on from one generation to another. So we don't have those sort of conflicts. Yes, there might be conflicts in approach, but the destination is pretty much shared.
Absolutely. Great.
Between all family members.
Yeah. Thanks, Rama, and I'll come back to you in a bit. Coming back to you, Feriza, there's a specific question in terms of any specific advice that you have for young and more importantly women entrepreneurs. And there are a lot of comments commending you on the quality of your products. So that's not a question, but that's just comments. But going back to the question, any specific advice for young entrepreneurs and especially women entrepreneurs?
Right. So Advait, I think to be an entrepreneur, you need to have vision, you need to have courage, you need to have, perspective on why you choose to do what you choose to do, and stay committed to that. It really doesn't depend whether you're a man or a woman. If you possess these qualities, I think you will achieve your goal and you will achieve your dream. What I always tell all my female colleagues at work is to be treated as an equal. You need to kind of put in, as much as everybody else does, and there needs to be no shortcuts or special privileges or any of those and nothing that kind of weakens or makes, oh, ladki hai so it's okay madam, she can't come today. We're in a COVID situation and we're supplying chicken all across Bombay and Pune. And I'm at work. I'm at work every single day. I'm a mother of 2 young children. And if I don't step forward, how can I expect the rest of my team to? So I keep telling, so it's if madam can come do bache hai, and if she can put, that to danger and she can still, show up, I'm sure we can. So I think I'm a huge believer in just kind of, not playing the gender and just kind of focusing on, kind of working on the qualities that make an entrepreneur successful.
Okay. So lead by example is what you're saying.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. One more follow-up question is from Akshay Mehrotra. Maybe Teresa, you take it. Is that how do you manage delegation? How do you decide what to delegate, when to delegate, and how much to delegate, and when do you pull it back? I know it's a trick question for you.
Yeah, because Advait thinks I'm a control freak and I don't delegate at all. Right. So, the way Zorabian is run, my father kind of is a chairman and managing director, and he kind of centers us. And we have my brother who handles the farming operations, and I handle sales operations, marketing, and distribution. So there's a very clear line of demarcation between our responsibilities, and we stay within our boundaries so that we don't kind of clash with each other too much. So I think, in a business, when you're working with siblings, it's really important to be respectful of those spaces. And Advait knows for a fact, what is mine, I take care of, and I don't interfere in what I'm not supposed to interfere with. In terms of delegation, I have to be honest, I can't lie. So I do delegate, but I kind of tend to micromanage a lot. So I really admire Pratik when he says, I just look at the bottom line and I'm, good with that. I will still keep kind of, okay, this is perfect, but let me see, maybe we can do this. I have this incessant need to interfere, which Advait knows is my weakness. And I kind of need to kind of really, I think Zorabian has grown because it's a great quality product. I think we would have been a much larger company had I not been so much of a control freak. Yeah, for sure. Happy, Advait?
It's a trick question. Yeah. Okay. Pratik, there's a question for you that, when you're part of a family and, willy-nilly you're expected to start looking after one aspect of the business. In this case, you looked up the hospitality part. How do you get trained? I mean, is there any difference in conversation in the conference room versus conversation at the dinner table? And, how does the young generation, so when you are, younger than what you are right now, were you put through some kind of things at home or given specific things in office? How do you train the younger generation when it comes to family business?
So it's an interesting story actually. So when I got right out of college, my father wanted me to come back, and there was a big fight as to I want to stay and work in Switzerland for a while, anywhere abroad.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to come back to India. But he won the fight in that case. And the day I came back, in a few, like in a couple of years, when we were talking, he happened to mention that, said he felt that if I had worked longer, I would go into a mode where I wouldn't be able to make decisions at all. So I was sort of allowed to make more decisions than I could handle. So seen a lot of failures also, but today I can make decisions much quicker and much, they somehow turn to be the right ones.
That's a nice way of saying it, but I'm sure you took the right decisions. I'll go back to something what you said and take the carry on with what Teresa just mentioned, that just because you're a family member working in the company, you can't take too many kind of shortcuts for yourself or discount yourself too much. Now, when you said that you were forced to take decisions that perhaps were out of reach for you and you made mistakes. Now, how did the other people how do other people take it? कि अरे गलती किया मगर साहब है इसलिए छोड़ दिया. If I were as a professional would have taken the same decision, perhaps I would have been shown the door. How do you manage this kind of thing? So you're allowed to take the which goes wrong, but a professional may not be allowed to take a decision.
No, so fortunately for me, we've like in the group itself, we've got enough people taking their own decisions. So it is also about certain professional boundaries. So even if you're taking your decision, you're consulting with other people and you're making sure that they're on board with it, because at the end of the day, I cannot make an ad hoc decision and expect everyone to follow suit. Where the company is also large enough for me not being able to do it. So I have to make sure that the certain people that need to be on board are on board, or use tactics to get them on board. So that's the only way I can function, because you have to respect professional boundaries. There is there's no doubt in that.
Sure. Great. Rama, question for you is, how do you manage to sort of ensure that whatever you do doesn't get looked upon just because you carry a fifth generation illustrious surname, but because who you are, and like Pratik said, the right kind of decisions that you have taken. Sometimes the decisions may go wrong, fair enough, but how do you ensure that people around you don't don't mix these two things together? Ama, is it just a lag or? Rama, can you hear us? Yeah, maybe by the time she comes, maybe Teresa, you want to take the same question?
So I think Advait, with any organization, right? Whether you're whether you're kind of the person taking over or whether you're a professional that comes in, I think everyone kind of earns and has to earn their respect. She's come on.
Yeah, Rama. Sorry, we lost you in between. Did you get my question?
Ultimately, the surname will only open doors, right? I think it's up to the individual to walk through.
That's true. But have you had, has there been any experience where, people sort of got confused or mixed things up?
And when it comes to decision making.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yeah, we can. There's a lag, huge lag, but we'll be patient.
Hear me?
Yeah, please continue. No, I think there's some technical issue. Sorry, Parizad, you want to continue with the stop?
So, Advait, when it comes to earning your title, I think it's always you've got to earn it, right? You've got to win that respect, and you've got to win that trust of your colleagues, your employees, everyone, that the team that works with you. I've always, whilst I do interfere a lot, and I do micromanage. I'm a huge, which I am, but I'm a huge team player.
Yes, I can hear you.
Right? I will ask everybody. I will just end that and then let her take over, right? I'm always huge with kind of engaging with the entire team and making decisions where everyone kind of also feels a part of that decision. So it doesn't happen that, oh, the boss has made the decision and we have no choice but to follow. There's a lot of teamwork that goes on with every single decision. And it may be, from the K-cart manager to the sales head to the calendar head to even the driver and helper who's actually doing that dispatch.
Okay. I know we are running short of time, so I have two more questions. One to the three of you, and then one separately, one to Sonu. Now, as family business inheritors, now I'm sure that there'll be several people who work with you in your offices, who are senior people, who must have seen you as kids, must have played with you, kind of thing, as they say, "Tando pe khilaya hai" kind of thing. And now you've come into the office, you are their boss, and how have you managed? I'm sure each one of you have enough number of such people in your own offices. So how have you managed this transition, between maybe, in good old days, you're calling them Chacha or Mama or Chachi or whatever, Masi or whatever. And now, in a professional life, come what may, of course, you are their bosses. So how have you managed that? Rama, are you with us and you can hear the question?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so if you can start with you then.
Right. So, in our company, we're generally a very professionally run company. So when I was not in the company, I really had no business of being on the company premise. And I've only met some of our senior VPs in our home a couple of times. But by the time I joined the business, they were close to retiring or already retired. So I did not have this issue.
Okay, so you didn't have to face this issue at all. Okay,
no.
Excellent. Maybe lucky you, I would say. Yeah, Prateek, you have any experience like that? And how have you managed?
I do with a few people who've been there in the company for about a good 30, 35 years, 25, 30 years, whatever. But somewhere I felt they always knew that this day would come. So it's not a transition, like it's no issue transitioning that relationship, but I feel that, as long as you keep their respect also, they will respect you back, and they will be loyal to you. So I never saw that as an issue, but I made sure that I give them their due respect.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic answer. Yeah, Parizad.
So Advait, yes, there's a whole legacy of people that have actually been working with us for over 30 years, and all of who've seen me grow up and seen us all grow up. But they've kind of been more custodians, literally, of the legacy. So I think, people like Nadeem Uncle and, all of them kind of, when I started, kind of have literally eased me into the business and kind of helped me much more. Like, my father's a hard taskmaster. Like, he kind of, he cracks the whip, but, people like Nadeem Uncle have kind of eased me into the business. I've always kind of, and now that I've, completely taken over, they're so respectful, and that they acknowledge the contribution. And I think, like Prateek says, when you respect them as well, because they've got the experience behind them, but they applaud you for the energy, and they may guide you sometimes when you're being a bit rash and aggressive. But I think it's really wonderful when the old and the new kind of work together, because there's experience and there's passion kind of joining hands, which is quite an unbeatable combination.
Excellent. One last question, perhaps on a slightly controversial note, back to you, Sonu, and back to the first story that was discussed today in the presentation, the Burmans and their view in terms of whether anything should go to the woman in the family. What's your view on this? And this is this is not an old book. This is a 2-year-old book, which means these views are still as young as 2 years ago. What's your take on it? I mean, we have 3 of you as women business leaders here. So what's your view, and how did you manage that when you were sort of dealing with these people while writing the book?
Okay, so Advait, see, the thing is that it's a fait accompli. This is the case. The patriarchs have traditionally not wanted the women to be part of the core business. So you can't just wish it away. So it's not really a business problem. This is also a sociological problem, also a human behavioral problem. Now, while I may understand some of the issues, I may not condone it, but I do understand where the patriarchs are coming from. But before I go into that, let me tell you that things, they are changing. And the reason again they're changing is not because patriarchs have suddenly acquired some new knowledge. It's again a sociological change. So 30, 40 years ago, it was very common for well-to-do families to have 5 children, 6 children, 10 children. And at least one of them would have been a boy. And therefore, the patriarch had a choice to say, this is going to be my successor. Today, even, when you look around and you see the successful business people, the big industrialists, they may have 1, 2, at most 3 children. And a lot of them are just girls, are just women. So the patriarch actually doesn't have a choice, and therefore, that with that choice taken away, some of the more progressive and smarter patriarchs are choosing to get the women into the core business. Traditionally, what used to happen was that if there was a woman who wanted to explore her entrepreneurial skills, she would be told, keep away from the core business. Tell me how much of money do you want? Go set up something on your own. And typically the women therefore set up the foundations, or they branched out and did something else. Today, you have Perizad here, you have Amma here, you have the Reddy sisters, you have the, from some of the people that I've spoken with, the Laksa Paints, Analjit Singh's daughter, even Kuldeep Singh's daughter, they're all part of the core business. But I have a nasty suspicion that for all patriarchs who have only, daughters, if they had a son, the choice may have been that it is the son who gets it. Now, let me tell you the way I look at it, the way I understand the reason of the patriarchs to keep the daughters away from the business. I may tell you, I may explain it to you. It doesn't mean that I fully subscribe to it, but this is my understanding. So my understanding comes from the fact that when you see a marriage in any house, not only a family business house, it is the mother who gives her jewelry to the daughter with this strict instruction that this is yours, daughter. Don't let your mother-in-law or your sister-in-law take it, right? Because this is your Sridham. This is my inheritance that I am passing on to you, and therefore this is yours. Don't let anybody else take it. Now you cut to the patriarch. Now the patriarch's assets are only the family business. He doesn't have jewelry, he has family business. When even if he wants to give it to the daughter, there is always this thought in his mind, which has been articulated by a lot of patriarchs that I have interacted with, that if it remains only with my daughter, I am absolutely okay with it. But once the daughter gets married, goes into a new family, what if that family falls into a bad time and they want to acquire either the shares, they want to pledge it, they want to sell it, I will lose my business. So I understand that apprehension that patriarchs have, but situations have changed. It is now a fact that a lot of well-to-do families have only 2 children who are both daughters. I am sure that going forward, 20 years, 30 years from today, this situation would have changed to a large extent because the business owners, the business people are some of the smartest people because they're running businesses, they've overcome challenges. They will find a solution to manage this apprehension that the patriarch has. And I quite understand that apprehension that the patriarch has, but I'm sure that there will be a situation, there will be a solution found.
Great, great. I got reminded of an actual incident I knew of I can't name, but a South Indian business family. And there was this lady who was a second generation family member, and she got married. And exactly what you said, that how do we this thing? But the solution they came out with is that the business along with the daughter went to the new house as dowry. So it stayed with the lady, but in the new family. But they didn't have to part ways with the business. But it's actual. Sounds funny, but yeah, this is what has happened. And different cultures. Great. So I think we are way past time. So, but thank you all of you. Unfortunately, we couldn't see Rama at all. But thank you all of you for the wonderful insights that you've shared. 3 or 4 quick takeaways for me for this session from all of you were that from a family business perspective, what matters most is family values, and it came out very clearly from all the speakers. Follow your passion. That was another one. Which came up as a takeaway. I think Rama mentioned very clearly, the surname can perhaps open only doors. Beyond that, it is up to you, your grit, your determination, and your leadership that will take the company forward beyond the 3rd generation and not follow that kind of metrics. And Pratik quite rightly put it that you need to know your limits. You need to know what you don't know, and it's good if it's not necessary that you need to know everything. And therefore, in different ways, some less, some more, you need to start delegating. So that's also critical. So once again, thank you all of you for this wonderful session, wonderful insights. And from my and Eclabia's side, thanks again to NHRDN, both the corporate office as well as NHRDN Pune, for supporting us in this venture. And we hope, I don't know, our next session is planned around 22nd of June. I don't know what the situation is going to be. Are we going to have 100% online session or a hybrid session where we will have people in the room and we still would try and sort of webcast this? So thank you once again for the large number of people who attended, and hope you could take away a lot of things from this. And if you've left wanting in terms of more stories from the book, where to buy that book and which book to
Please buy my book.
I'm gonna go get it right away. I'm gonna get it right away.
But
I'm gonna get it.
Thank you.
So thanks Sonu, thanks Bedra, thanks Pratik, and thanks Rama, and thanks NHRDN again. Thank
Happy
you.
meeting all of you, and the best. And do read my book, please.
Yes, 100%.
Yes,
I can't wait. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you.